Hello everybody, and welcome to what do we want to say, like week 4 of the course, I think at this point we are. So congratulations, you've made it at least about a fourth of the way through of a 16-week semester. So I can say this, for those of you and we've had some really good participation rates. I think I could look back over the discussion threads, but I know by and large, I think there's like 30 of us in the class. And so I'm getting the majority, if not all, of the course are keeping up and doing their work on time, and I think we're really benefiting from all of it as a class. I know I'm really thrilled with the uniqueness and the thoroughness and the amount of insightfulness I think that you guys, that everyone here is producing with the links that they're going out there and looking up. I think it's beginning to be pretty obvious that issues of indigeneity and indigenousness, land rights, natural resource development rights, how all of these things intersect. It seems as though largely geographically it's within North and South America and places in Western Australia or folks in Australia, some a little bit in Africa. So I would encourage us, and that's that sort of tripartite of the Americas and sort of a Pacific Rim, sort of a geographic space, if that makes sense, right? If you think of Australia here, and then so there's that big sort of geographic rim that builds around. That's largely where, or a study of Pacifica maybe, and the Pacific Ocean. I mean, that's largely where I think sometimes studies of global indigeneity, studies of global indigenous literature often sort of focus around that area. So I think it's natural that we've begun to develop it in that way. But I would also encourage us to maybe look outside. I'm trying really hard to get my hands on a new film that's going to be released called Sami Blood. Sami folks are in Finland. Indigenous folks in Finland, the spelling on Sami is S-A-M-I. I'll admit my own ignorance of knowing much about them as an ethnic group, but I think the film seems interesting from what I've read about it, because a lot of the same issues, it's 1930s, and they were attempting to genealogically sort of describe Sami and how Samis are somehow enough of a genealogical differentiation between them that they were somehow non-Finnish in some ways, or because those little, I don't know, I'm really probably going to be bad at explaining this, but in trying to explain indigeneity as a genetic component, and less so maybe from a physical anthropologist, what we call, which is a study of people's face shapes and eye shapes and cranial shapes and I don't know, teeth shapes, right? Your standard sort of, genetic sort of dominant and recessive traits that sort of make people look different, right? Around the globe. They're trying to explain in some ways cultural difference based upon the intersection of physical difference and cultural difference having some theoretical underpinning for how we see each other. And that same sort of understanding has sort of been carried through, or was also developed with indigenous populations here in North and South America, right? Very early on, and I won't bog down in this discussion of it, but we've just sort of veered into this way. I want to try to find that film, and I want to encourage us to maybe expand, expand our ideas of sort of indigeneity and begin to look for indigenous groups and other parts of the world. Maybe that would be my challenge to us as a class. But what you guys have been doing so far, even if we continue to sort of develop a body of evidence only on the geographic reasons that we've managed, that for whatever reason is that we're interested in as a class in that Pacific Rim, we could keep doing that. But I would encourage you to maybe start looking around beyond that geographic region as well. Let's get beyond Pacifica maybe, or think about it. No big deal. Or you could continue to sort of look in the way you are to get to where we are with. I just want to say that I think it was Jacob in week 3. I would encourage everybody to maybe look at Jacob. I may blow your last name here, but Jacob Trentow's post. I found it really fascinating for one that was there in week 3. You might want to take a look in the exchange there. There's also others that I've sort of chimed in on. Queer Panic, an Almanac of the Dead, I thought was pretty interesting where Sage and I were talking. But let's just, I would just take a look there because that's a really good. What Jacob did there was taking what we're reading about an Almanac of the Dead and finding a way to draw a connection between the talking about native gangs in Winnipeg, Canada, and so he found a way to tie it back to the novel, and that's a richness of sort of how I would like to see us sort of going forward as well. Always when you're reading, take a little bit of time after you read and you've summarized this article to think about in some way how it relates to what we're reading. Right? We would have read up to page 200 in Sokol's Almanac of the Dead. You'll obviously need to read up to about page 300 in Almanac of the Dead for week 4. And some things that have really sort of begun to strike me through these first couple of hundred pages in Almanac. I know I've talked about, and I promise I'm going to try to keep this video short. But I want us to think about the relationship between the characters. There seems to be a fragmentation, right? The entire world of the novel is one of fragmentation. The structure is one of fragmentation. The way these stories link together is very fragmented and sort of what we might call atomized out into these sort of, sorry, it's my dog. These real fragmented senses of identity. And it seems to be, it breaks down in this sort of intergenerational play between grandmothers, mothers, and daughters, grandmothers, mothers, and sons, right? There seems to be this deviation between, and a lot of fracturing of the family along mother and children lines in some ways. And so not only does I think that Sterling maybe in some ways struggles for an identity as a Laguna, but it seems as though all the characters, right? It seems as though every character in this novel, whether they're indigenous or non-indigenous, everyone is living in this world of extreme fragmentation and a difficulty, and almost to the point to where identities begin to sort of be overrepresented in a way. And by overrepresented, I mean that they begin to sort of be parodies of themselves. So that if someone tries to find a center of identity in Almanac of the Dead, I think it's going to be very difficult to do so. And that's not only because of, I think, the extremes in this novel, which is, this novel is anything if not, it is a novel of absurdness and a novel of extremes. And so everything in this and within this world is sort of blown way out of proportion, especially the intensive altered states, right? The heavy use of mind-altering drugs, right? Cocaine, alcohol, LSD. I could go on. It's just, but this all characters seem to exist in this sort of mind-altered state, and yet they continue to sort of construct a reality around that. And I think there's some relationship between that abusive world of extremity, that of going beyond and pushing beyond the boundaries of sort of normal reality, and no matter what it is. And even with the grotesque, right? This novel sort of veers off into the grotesque. I think, and we were talking about Queer Panic before, and how Beaufry is seen as this evil sort of nemesis. But as I've read and reread those sections again, there seems to be, even though everything is extreme, that extremist in some ways tries to reconstruct a reality, to take into account maybe what it's like to live under a settler colonial system, to where the signs and for what everything sort of represents to be normal have sort of been taken over and corrupted and turned into something else. And it seems to be underlying all this is there's this great sort of, the epic sort of battle between good and evil, right? And many of the characters that we see behaving in less than virtuous ways, right? Less than moral ways, seem to be part of this underbelly of something working for something good, right? As though the reality in the novel is what is corrupted. And what is corrupted in the novel is what is good, and what is trying to sort of disrupt that reality and produce a world that is meaningful for the indigenous characters in the novel, regardless of where they're from. And I think it's important for us to remember too that we're talking about indigeneity as it cuts across nationalism. So this idea that there are natives living in Tucson, but there's also natives living in Mexico, right? There's this sense that indigeneity is beginning to take on this very sort of global sort of expansiveness in this novel. And it's not limited to the tribal structure, right? This seems to be a call in this novel anyway, less concerned sometimes about tribal specificity and more concerned about this concept of indigeneity and how it can sort of disrupt from the underbelly and disrupt the sort of greater world that it is. And there seems to be this tension that's slowly building in the novel, right? But at the same time, there seems to be this sense of this old world of knowledge that's slowly beginning to sort of be uncovered. And the notebooks that Leitcha will be translating, and the brief sort of role of the Yupik people in Alaska, and this sort of, there seems to be this sense of a knowledge that is based in something that is pre-Columbian, that is pre-European. And it seems as though the characters and even though that's presented in some ways as evil and this nemesis, that is in some way going to disrupt this settler colonial setting. Or it's there bubbling beneath the surface, embroiled in witchery and sorcery and all things that we might consider to be less than virtuous. But those things are eventually going to come to the forefront of the novel. I'll keep this short. I tried to, and so I'm not going to keep going on. Read the next 300 pages and of the novel, and see if you can get to, when you're working on your discussion post, have them relate back to the novel in some way if you can. See if you can, and I don't care how outlandish the connection may be. Let's just see if you can get back to it. All right, thanks so much, and I'll see you next week. Bye.